So when I do the work, it's coming from a whole nother level of passion and commitment. I truly feel like the work that I've done within the communities of Houston, learning the skills to articulate yourself when you have certain issues, knowing how to address trauma that you never dealt with before, having certain particular conversations with people that are difficult to have conversations with, but finding a medium to be able to do that. These are what the restorative practices that have helped me do. All right. So in Houston, Texas, over 70,000 people are trapped in the criminal justice system without being able to afford an attorney. 71% of those people that are trapped in the criminal justice system are receiving inadequate defense. Now, that's about 50,000 people. 50,000 people. Think about that. That's the same amount of people at Texas A&M College Station. Now, this is a problem, and the problem is leading into mass incarceration. Now, we have access to all these numbers, all this information, but the bigger question is, what are we doing about it? Now, Restoring Justice is a nonprofit organization which is offering loving and holistic legal services to the oppressed and the forgotten. And today we have the CEO and founder of Restoring Justice, a defense attorney, a father and a husband, and a good friend of mine, Drew Willey. How you doing, man?
Carlos, thanks for having me.
To the show, man.
Yeah.
How you feeling?
Good.
Good. Well, to intro, the way I met Drew, while I was at Kip Houston High School, I was working with an attorney that was coming into the school, as I alluded to in previous episodes, coming in and speaking to my students about what to do when they get pulled over, certain laws to know, and information that I thought would be impactful for my students to have. And within that time that I worked with her, her name was Christina Beeler, we built a relationship, and she hit me up one day with an email telling me, hey, there's this guy, he's an attorney, and he has his own nonprofit organization, and he would love to learn more about restorative practices within a school system. And I remember it was very quick. We got in contact, and I met Drew for lunch. And he paid for lunch, which was pretty good. And we just had an organic conversation about restorative practices in school and how to help the community and the people. And it just seemed so genuine, his take on it and his views on it and the compassion with it. And it just felt real to me. So I got a good impression from this guy, and I wanted to bring him to the show and have my audience experience a conversation with a defense attorney that has his own nonprofit, trying to build this restorative work not only within schools but across the country. So the first question I want to ask you, Drew, is what inspired you or influenced you to start your nonprofit, Restoring Justice?
Yeah, there's a lot of factors that went into it. Obviously, a lot of kind of inspirational moments. The most tangible one was when I was the summer after my first year of law school, and I went to law school to be a tax lawyer.
Oh.
I was a tax accountant before, and I thought they'd let me be a glorified accountant if I had a law degree.
Gotcha.
But I worked at death penalty clinic at the same time as I was doing my old accounting job. So in the mornings, I was doing accounting work for an oil and gas company, and then afternoons and nights representing folks on death row, where I would go to death row. I had never really had much exposure to the criminal justice system other than maybe some, college transgressions that my parents and resources could quickly handle and take care of. And I saw what Jefferson County, Beaumont, Texas did to a man that was very poor, mentally ill, Black. And the way that the system trampled him, didn't allow his story to be told. Even as I was trying to fill out a clemency petition to Governor Perry at the time, even the attorneys on that, because of his mentally ill claims, disallowed a lot of his story to be told.
Gotcha.
And so you talk about a man that at the end of the summer, Texas took his life, a totally redeemed man whose story never got told
Hmm.
because of lack of counsel, lack of adequate counsel.
Hmm.
I saw that as an injustice that just couldn't stand. And if this was true in our system, something more had to be done.
I have a question, man. What's it like? Like I guess how did you feel going at for like the first time?
Yeah.
Like going into speaking or talking to someone knowing they're gonna die.
That's a good question.
Yeah, part of me couldn't even believe that they let us do that, right? Just a law student first year, just trying to get good grades, and they're letting us go into Polinsky unit is where death row is in Texas. And so, you have the hour-long drive. You drive through the fields, right? Which now I have different images of in my brain of remnants of the history as I've learned, right? Of these cotton fields all around these prison yards, right? What that means in the work that they're trying to exploit out here. And then driving up to the tower, right? And they're like checking your back, see if you have questioning me about the golf clubs back there. Is that a weapon, right? And it's like, this is odd. And then they don't let you take anything but your ID card into it. And then, to your question about speaking to someone, it was just very quickly it got past the awkward worry tension, because very quickly Marvin Wilson was the client's name, and particularly with him, very quickly I could tell this man was joyful, this man was loving, this man was redeemed, and he just wanted to talk. And so the human aspect really took over very quickly despite the glass. And there's really kind of real connection there.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's Steve. Now, with that's what inspired you and influenced you to start your nonprofit. Can you talk about the process to getting that done? Because you talking about that happened when you were in law school. What was your process to like getting into practicing law and then doing what you were doing, what you're doing now as a defense attorney, into having your own nonprofit?
Yeah. Marvin Wilson's execution was certainly the turning point for me, that no longer tax law was it, and it was indigent criminal defense was the only thing that I felt called to do. And so, some doors opened. I got some good training in public defense by a group called Gideon's Promise through a program with the Public Defender's Office here in Harris County. And just started hitting the streets, right, trying to build my practice without a nonprofit. And the calls I would get from folks knowing that I was wanting to represent the poor, of people saying, hey, my court-appointed attorney hadn't seen me, hadn't seen my brother in 6 months, right? They haven't done anything on the case. Enough calls came in to where like I couldn't do that pro bono and survive. And God just put on my heart that you better do this the full way and do it nonprofit style. And he's been with us ever since and grown it.
Wow.
What for those that don't know, what is a nonprofit? What does nonprofit mean?
Yeah, so it's essentially an organization that it doesn't run like a business because it doesn't generate its own profits. It takes donations so that it can provide a service. And so there's all these kind of trigger points that, a lot of times it's replacing government services. Ours is actually pretty direct in that, but yeah, you just justify yourself. And if you do start running a business and selling goods and stuff, you got to pay taxes on that. But if you're just collecting money to provide this service, then you don't have to pay any taxes.
So with your nonprofit, Restoring Justice, can you talk about a little bit how that works? How do people get in contact with you? What exactly do you service people with, and how does it look for people to understand, like how they make it go?
Yeah, I love that question because we have kind of a secret, maybe unexpected kind of answer to it. Is we don't really advertise and wait for referrals. Like we have no kind of marketing needs for clients. Like that 50,000 that you cited. I mean, we know exactly where they are, and we know which of those 50,000 are being most oppressed and most forgotten.
So you go get them.
So we go get them.
Gotcha. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that, man. That's awesome. Now, what was that like? What is the most difficult thing for you being a defense attorney, especially out here in Houston, Texas?
Yeah, you know, I was fortunate to have this really good Gideon's Promise public defender training that kind of prepped me to face the daily oppressions that being in court, you know, you're faced with, because you're standing there as a lawyer and your quote colleagues or peers, ordinarily as society would define it, as probably the judge sitting on the bench and the prosecutor.
Yeah.
Well, those two people, and luckily things are starting to change in Harris County, but historically, right, those two people are trying to very tangibly, very every single day, every moment, trying to throw your client into oppression, whether it's a physical cage or not. And so standing and walking in that kind of path to where you're trying to stand in the way of people that are supposed to be your colleagues is something that can be very lonely. You know, because your client's not happy because you're not doing enough. The judge is pissed at you because you're throwing a wrench in his mass incarceration machine.
Hmm.
The prosecutor's just trying to get home by noon. Yeah.
So there's more pressure on you to do what you put out to do with a purpose, which is crazy. I mean, I think it's important for people to hear that, and that's why I asked you, because with the line of work that we do within schools, and what we talked about with bringing restorative practices or restorative justice type stuff within a school, how difficult it is when there's so much going on and how systems are set up already. I want to know, like, when with schools, I know you got you're working with people. You have someone that works with you that does circles and that type of work. Can you talk about what that looks like, and like what are you trying to do within communities along with like circles and building relationships with people?
Yeah, so not directly to schools.
Yeah, not directly.
Yeah. So the community is really great. I mean, we just, by the grace of God, moved into a new spot in Fifth Ward, over at, and anyone's welcome to come by. It's an open kind of community space, over on New Orleans Street. But what we're doing there is really opening it up to allow communities to come in and directly engage with mass incarceration. So we've got volunteers that are meeting directly with clients, those most oppressed, forgotten, voiceless clients, to really help lift them out, and really trying to start organizing circles to allow a healing process, really the restorative justice of people that are facing the traumas of that oppressive system.
Gotcha. That's awesome. Because with the line of work that I was doing at Kippy's High School, and what I'm doing now, pushing into more schools, is trying to build those type of practices with students, and not only like make it when things go wrong, right? Because I think that's what happens in the justice system and then in school systems, where they wait till things go wrong, and then we're trying to figure out what that looks like. Oh, let's do circles, let's have people talk. And I think it's about building a culture, and that's why I love what you're doing, because you're trying to shift the culture by like making it norms, right? And that's my mission, to build my curriculum to kind of like give schools more access to like something more concrete more often, where they can start doing this restorative stuff, and then kids aren't like shocked when something goes wrong. It's like, oh, let's talk now. Right? It's more of like they've been practicing within their classes.
Well, and you're building a culture that, like, hey, let's talk and let's engage, rather than let's just call the police, right? Let's just fear. Let's let fear abound, and that's why I think you and I connected so quickly. Was like, essentially you and I are addressing the same thing in a long term kind of same way. Look, when something goes wrong, when there's a break in community, when there's a scar in community, which is essentially what school discipline or crime, is there's some kind of scar in this little isolated community, however you define it. What is our response going to be to that? Shouldn't it be to heal that scar, which then, ultimately is like wholeness for everyone involved? And that's really what you're doing in the schools, and that's what we're trying to make sure we do in the criminal justice system, which fortunately in America, nobody's ever tried to think of the justice system as what I believe to be kind of biblical wholeness justice.
It's good that you say that, because I had this conversation over the phone with someone that I was telling you earlier from Canada, and just talking about like, why don't we want to work toward being whole as individuals, right? And I'm working with educators and administrators now to give them the training to use, but it's more about like just being better individuals, like being able to live a life that is able to be lived with less stress. You know what I mean? Being able to have these difficult conversations and address things. I think it's just exposure, like just being able to have exposure, because people think about, to be honest, the stigma of like circles and restorative practice, like, oh, it's this kumbaya thing, like sit in circle, that don't work, right? Especially in the Black and brown communities. It's just like bull for people. And I think it's, bringing, and that's what I'm using my story with my father and everything like that, where it's like it's bigger than that, you know what I mean? Because it killed my father, like holding that stuff in, saying like whatever happens in a household stays in a household type bull that you just build up. And essentially, yeah, I said this earlier to someone, and it hit me. It made me realize even more. And I think that's what the point of the work is, right? The more you talk about it, the more you identify it, right?
Yeah.
It's just like we tell ourselves whatever happens in the household stays in the household, right? And we keep on telling ourselves that, and then we're protecting it until we forget it. And then it becomes trauma that you're unconscious about, right? And then your behaviors start doing what the trauma, taught you, right? And then it's brought on to your kids, and then it just repeats the cycle. You know what I mean? And it's just exposure is what the mission is. And I think, and I know with starting at every level, like Dre is as a behavioral specialist, being in the classroom trying to. I see him working to like build that culture with those kids, but like there's so many things that's in the way, or like the way the system is set up, and then trying to get to like a whole in all, like from top to bottom in schools and in communities and in the criminal justice system. Like I think it's important that you said, you brought up how difficult it is. You're going against what is the norm right now, right? Which is crazy.
That was crazy. 'Cause when he said that, I was like, man, I got sitting there think about it. Our jobs are so alike than I even thought about, because my hardest part of my job is not getting the kid to behave. That's actually the easy part for me. I'm in a setting in which I can actually get to know the student. I get to understand where they come from in the background. I get to see why they think the way they think, why they make the choices they make, why they react the way they react, right? Everyone else can, diagnose them real quickly and, say this is the problem or this. But, sometimes when you really look in, like when you meet some of these people that are on death row and you see the outside world like, oh, they're monsters, but then you walk in within 10 minutes, you see that there's a real person. So it's the same thing with me. It's like, okay, yeah, anybody can look at a kid's rap sheet and say, oh, well, hearing what they did, they must be the worst kid in the world. But then I'm like, have you even sat down with this kid for more than 10 minutes to hear who he is, how he feels, but the hardest part is simply getting them accepted back. Like I got a classroom full of kids, which half of them could probably be in class, but no one wants to accept a kid with that label. And I'm thinking about everybody who gets out of jail, right? No job wants to get that felon or the person with the record.
Take a risk on them.
And so it's like you said, you're sitting there trying to make sure your client doesn't go into that life of oppression. The same thing with the students. Right? I'm trying to make sure that they don't go through the rest of their school year with a tag or behavior label on them, because no matter where they go, there's always going to be on the record that they have actually been through it. And some of the kids, especially the ones that probably didn't need as an intensive behavior setting such as mine, well, they'll eventually turn into those kids that do need it, because they'll be so surrounded by that. And that's what they will end up learning or picking up on. And again, that's the same thing happens in the criminal justice system, right? They just put you in jail. You see people going to jail for something like the smallest things, but while they're in there, they develop this mentality, and then it gets worse and worse and worse. Yeah. And so again, it's the same thing, especially when, in my class, it's set up for anybody between kindergarten and 5th grade. Well, it's not a lot of times where you actually see a class with every single grade level, but I haven't had a year in which every single grade level wasn't in my class. And so I'm like, how is this not jail? Like how are you are putting a whole bunch of kids with a whole bunch of different problems in a whole bunch of different age groups, a whole bunch of different grade levels, and you're telling me to teach them all,
Conditioning.
fix them all, get all of those behaviors back to normal, right?
And those intentions aren't even there in county jail.
Right.
Yeah.
And then not even that. Then I have to convince another person that they could be in their class.
Right.
Then I have to convince. And so in the system you fight against, like you're saying, it's just a system that you're fighting against.
Mm-hmm.
Well, these schools that send kids to me are profiting because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Their test scores are great.
Mm.
Right? That kid isn't up in there disrupting a class full of 25 kids that now with that kid out and he's in my class, those 25 kids can sit there right now.
Scores go up, more money's
So, you know, even when we're in these meetings in which we have to go over all the legal stuff up to the parent as they come in the class, right? And they're like,
Hard meetings?
right, yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah. I would
Mom was
love.
a diagnostician.
Oh, man. Man,
Yeah.
like I would love to have like a reality TV show on our meetings alone.
Oh,
Yeah.
Like,
that's the whole
I mean, you hear some of the stories,
Mhm.
but it's almost like, okay, you read this legal literature to the
Mhm.
parents,
Yeah.
and like, what some of the questions are: is the classroom environment better with that kid out? I mean,
Right.
and in so many words, right? It's like
Yeah.
it doesn't say it right. And so, or can you, with this kid in the room, does it distract the learning environment? Of course, every teacher's going to say yeah,
Mhm.
right? But then, like you said, they come here and it's like, wow, after a week or two of showing them that you actually care about them and getting to know them, then all of a sudden those behaviors are gone, right? But are they willing to be accepted? Like all the schools that send kids, do they ever check on them and see if their behaviors are good enough again so they go back? Nah. As long as they're out their house and then as long as they're out their school, they're out that's not their problem. And then what really gets me is that in the month of October, where you have your school count has to be turned in to see how much money you're going to get per enrollment.
Yeah.
Starts
Once that date is over, my classroom size goes up.
Hmm.
Right? So now what are you looking at? Okay, now you got schools who get the funding for the kid. The moment the cutoff date goes, all right, get the kid out of here.
Jeez.
Right? Now they come to me, right? Well, the funding still goes there. Test scores goes to us, doesn't go there anymore. And so now all the good schools, the high scoring schools, oh man, if they see a kid that may not fit their ideal version of a student, or if they don't see a potential in helping that number go up, hey, what is he not doing his work? Is he sitting there without writing? Oh, that's a behavior problem. You know what? Let's track it.
Yeah.
Let's track it, right? Or let's say a kid does have some behavior problems, and we all know that, sometimes, I'm saying sometimes, majority of the time, behavior problems reflect the lack of knowledge in the classroom, right?
Yeah.
If I don't know, if I don't understand, if I'm not, if I can't cognitively, I'm gonna act up, I'm gonna act out, I'm gonna do something to get attention, right? So then, okay, well, now I got this kid who starts to act up. Right.
Yeah.
Now I got a kid who's acting up and who's low performing.
Mm.
You know what? I think we can just start tracking them until we get enough data to say, this kid needs to be in the behavior class.
Well, because as soon as that target is placed on their back, as soon as that label is placed on their back, then, fear becomes the infectious disease that it is and just takes over. And then it's not even a matter of those other teachers having the decision in their head of, is it a hard road or an easy road, right? I mean, obviously love is the hard road.
Yeah.
But that infection of fear comes in and says, well, just do the easy thing.
Right.
And the easy thing is uptick your budget, uptick your scores.
Right. Well, and it's crazy, like when you mentioned that fear, it was funny how I would see people come into my classroom, whether it be, someone from the district or a program specialist, and they would immediately change their mood when looking at my kids. I'm like, just because of the title of my classroom, they come in and just immediately look at each and every kid like something's wrong. I'm like, you walked in when they were sitting down, doing work, right? Kid just came up to me and asked a question. Go sit down. I'm like, what do you mean? Wait a minute. I didn't even say he was doing wrong yet. But the stigma right? Because my class is called behavior support class. When that kid got up out of his seat to come ask me a question, it looked something wrong. But if I were in the gifted and talented class, or if I were in this class and that kid got up, oh, it's cool.
You know,
You know?
it's conditioning in both ways because when I was at KIP, I was also a 504 coordinator. So I work with the RNs in these meetings too. And what I noticed is a big part of the struggle in those meetings, like I felt like at times, some of those meetings, I was like a motivational speaker because it was like I had to convince the kid of his abilities or her abilities because they've had been conditioned to believe
Something's wrong with them.
there's something wrong with them. And I'm like, it'll be for the, I've had cases because 504 isn't what they call the extreme situations, right? It's like kids have like they're diagnosed with something and it isn't that bad, but they need to place them somewhere, right?
When I did the 504 coordinator, yes,
Yeah.
prep is more about protection from your disability.
Correct. Yeah.
So whether it's severe or not,
Yeah.
it just puts there's laws that protect
Absolutely.
schools as well as and places of employment from pretty much making decisions based on your disability.
Yeah.
You know, so you can even college students take their 504
Yeah, take it with
to
them.
college,
Yeah.
and then they get certain accommodations or stuff like that.
But I remember like that was just like the struggle was like convincing the child because they have been in 504 for like 5-7 years and it's like they really believe that they're not able of because you can work your way out of 504. That's the difference. Like you can work out of it, and I had to like do this whole process of convincing not only the parent but the student that you can do this. You're capable. You've shown that you can do this. And it's just like the conditioning. So I can only imagine. I love that you connected everything because how it connects where it starts, and that's what we're talking about. It starts way young, and then it's all the way up to the criminal justice system. It doesn't look that much different.
It was crazy, like that episode that we actually did when we talked about success and
Yeah.
translating success. You know, of course, which highlights your book and everything you're
Yeah.
working towards. But we talked about this, you know, pretty much how to translate success. And I even took that after we had that episode, took it to my classroom, and we did a writing prompt on what does success look like to you. Because, like we talked about in that show, my success wouldn't be helpful for kids. Right, my success is creating a nice environment for them to send the kid to, so he can be comfortable in here and never have to go back. That'll look successful to me, but that doesn't feel successful to me. Like it's successful when that kid gets out and goes back in there, and then that teacher says, "Oh, well, he's great." Or when I get a family who moved to a different state, and they say, "Oh, okay, well, this kid's not only out of behavior, but they're getting awards." And so like that's success to me. But of course, in numbers, or when you look at that, that doesn't look like success because when you come in my classroom, you want to see the kids that couldn't function in that class functioning here because I have to back up what you did. Right, the school that sent them, I have to make you look good for sending them. Right. Same thing, like with like the system you say you're fighting against, but. The point is, like I said, after that, I had went to my classroom and I was like, I had to think about how every success story of a student that I did have and what did I do? Highlighted something they were good at and pressed on it. Because what have they gotten all their life? Pressure on what you were bad at.
Fear.
Fear, right? Yeah. So in order to switch their, convince them that they can do something, I have to show them what they have already done. I have to show them what skills that they already possess. I have to let them know that. And I even tell my coworkers, I'm like, sometimes when you read some of these incidents, you got to give the kid, he's a genius. Right. Like, of course it's bad. But to think of a way to do what you did that was bad lets you know that you got some intelligence somewhere in there. I got a kid that I'd let you know some of the stuff he did. You be like, what age is he? How did he even know to do that? And so once you highlight, like, okay, this kid can think. This kid can put things together. He just did it in a horrible way. Like some of criminals, probably are geniuses. Master's degrees, doctor level degrees are sitting in jail right now.
Oh, yeah.
Same thing in the behavior class.
Yeah.
And
the crazy thing is, too, off of that with, like, you were saying with the teachers being able to do that, right? Like tell them. I think what we talked about in the last episode was they haven't been able to do that in their own lives. They can't tell a relative, hey, you're doing great. right? They haven't addressed their own shit to be able to do in their own life. And then you're telling them to go in the classroom and do it with kids that they grew up like seeing a kid like that reminds them of a bully they had at school, or like, or I've seen this, the ultra confident kid, right, that has behavior issues, but he's just confident. It's like all like a show, right? But they're taking that as, oh, he's cocky, he doesn't need me to tell him that he's good at this already, right? And I think that's so. My wife was that type of student, right? My wife, she was the one that was very popular, was very outspoken, and had a voice, right? And because of that, and still to this day, even at her job and teaching, right? She's been going through this whole life because of the way she is. People around her don't tell her certain things that they would tell me. Because, right? Because it's like, oh, she doesn't need to hear this. She already has this, that, the third. But yet, a compliment like that is something that can change that person's day, right? We hear that all the time. But like, it's hard for them to do it because they have this bias, this unconscious bias, right? In that moment. And I think that goes from school all the way to the justice system. And the crazy thing is, it starts early, but you have so much support. Like you have more opportunity for support, right? Where teachers are like, you may come across one teacher or, you know, someone that could change your life.
The goal is there, yeah.
Yeah, but when they get older, it's gone. It's like you figure it out by yourself.
Nobody gives a shit.
Yeah, nobody gives a
There's
damn.
no goal there to treat anybody, and that fear feeds, right? I mean, that's, talk about the whole spectrum, and those students that are coming to your classroom, you know, the system, the fear that is embedded in the people that are driving them into where they end up, right? Well, then that gets internalized, and that kind of systematic oppression that they face, well, that's what we're calling institutionalization, right? That's the school to prison pipeline. Look, I told you I wouldn't have anything to say about that.
That is so on point, because like when as kids come to me, and one of the things that and most people don't understand is I can't wait for the first meltdown. That's the most honest time you will ever have a kid or experience with a kid is when they're having a meltdown. I've heard so much that goes on at home that went on at the old school, that went on from the other teacher in the midst of a random meltdown. Right, just simply listening to them as they're screaming, as they're saying, you know, everyone hates me, this person did this, and it's like, okay, well, let me listen to this right quick. You know, I'm not going to shut him down right now. You know, most people will say, no, you're disrespectful, you're yelling. No, you got to listen. Like, he's literally telling you everything that someone's ever did to him, ever told to him, right? I mean, most of my students, because remember, when a school, you know, has an art, you know, meeting and they make that decision that their kid is going, you know, is eligible to be in a special education or could go to a behavior class, from that point on, they just let them do whatever they want, because they know that, yeah, we know what direction we're moving in, so don't worry about it, right? So before they get to me, they probably had a month or two of going whatever they want to do, of going crazy, because they needed to collect that data to prove that they should be in a behavior class. You know, a lot of my kids spend most of their day in the front office. A lot of my kids spend most of the day in the back of the classroom, not even doing anything.
Well, and that's what happens in the system. There
exactly.
are active police decisions on where to go, and they've got their guys, and they tick them, and it's like, that's a trespass, that's a traffic ticket. We're building it up. We're building up those misdemeanors, and eventually we're gonna get the felony, and eventually we're literally gonna throw you away and lock the key and never let you out again.
Right. I mean, and again, it's exactly the same way, right? Like the idea of jail, right? Like, oh, I'm going to send you in here for 3 years, and after that, you should be okay, right? You're throwing kids in the behavior class with other kids, and again, when you walk into my class and you see just all the ones, like, you wouldn't think that the behavior class would have 11, 12, 13 kids in there. You know, this is special education, smaller setting behavior class, right? But kind of like you shared about your wife and how there's this stigma about her that she doesn't need the help or she doesn't need that feedback, right? Well, no one thinks I have a problem with 11 kids with 5 different grade levels.
Because you can handle it. Yep.
Because once they get in my classroom, yes, physically they're not running out anymore. I'm not calling parents left and right, so parents think, you know, feel like, oh, this must have been the right thing, because now my phone's not ringing every day, and I don't have to come up and get them, you know. And it's every time you think about it, you get outlook of bigger systematic issue, right?
Mhm.
Because you're looking at
So,
a first grader. Why would I ever get a kid with only 1 year of school experience? Think about that. Well, what typically happens to a first grade teacher, some small lady coming out of college, and teaching first grade. Oh, she's going to get the worst. But they always give the newer teachers, and they give the tenure teachers the best behaved, and they get them, right? So now you got the little girl who just started teaching and getting the worst of the worst. She's probably burned out after week 3 because she's never experienced a kid like that. Now, okay, well, now you got, and I've literally seen it. I've seen a teacher leave after half of the semester because she literally couldn't take it. But the kids in her class were deemed special ed or behavior problems.
Well, this whole spectrum, I'm just, and I can share a story because he's asked us to. I mean, this whole spectrum can be seen in this one case that we dealt with this week. His name is Kevin, and he had real serious trauma as a child, like been diagnosed with PTSD from something that happened, right? And so he got labeled, and he had anxiety and a personality disorder. So in schools, right, he was growing up, didn't have the recognition like your classroom can have, and so they just labeled him in that fear, and he's just been slowly institutionalized, and his mental illnesses never went diagnosed, and so now he's an adult, and now he's arrested, and he's got his first kind of potentially serious violent assault offense. And and so we've gotten to the place where there is not even the good intentions, and so the court appointed attorney has just sailed him down the road, right? And so he literally had been sitting for a year, and he had only seen his court appointed attorney 2 or 3 times. No defense, no plan, nothing for this guy. Our counselor, when we took over the case, our counselor started seeing him, and he said if nobody stepped in, he would have harmed himself enough to the point where I think he would have died in a month. So you're talking about this harm that's happened on this one body. I'm seeing it on the back end of what you're seeing on the front end. Is it literally was going to end this man's life. And at the last second, we were able to come in. Our attorney stood up for him. The prior attorney was going to do 6 years prison, sign it away forever. Our attorney came in. They didn't even know what to do, and they stood up and dropped it to a misdemeanor time served. We pulled him out. We got him into a 90-day program. Our counselor is going to see him. Our social worker got him connected. The volunteer brother is walking through that trauma with him now. And so, the organization's saving lives, but what it takes is you or restorative justice, or on the back end, restoring justice, to step in and be that stop and say, system, you cannot impose this oppression and fear on somebody. We have to enter love for this person's life at some point.
Yeah.
And it's just got to happen at some point. So I love that y'all are doing it early, and hopefully y'all do your work well.
Right. I was just sitting there thinking about that. I'm like, it's kind of ironic, right? Like I would get the kid at an early age, high school right here. That's right.
It's like the line, the chain.
We got our own business started right. Started right here.
No, but I think it's crazy because, like you said, that would have killed him. It would have ended him, right? PTSD that may have happened when he was at the kid's age that DeAndre deals with. Yeah. And that's how I'm looking at it. That's what happened to my father. My father ended his life due to a bunch of trauma unmet, right? Unmet needs, right? And he talked about, like, I remember my father was alive. He was in the era where the teachers could put hands on the students if they got permission from the mother or the parent. And my grandma gave him permission. And he was labeled as a bad kid, and it wasn't be sent to a room with another person that can talk to you different. It was, I'm gonna beat your ass in front of everybody till you start behaving. And that trauma like messed with him so bad. And I remember and just the anger and the way his pores rose when he told that story. Like he got real upset. And he didn't express it much, right? It was just, I forgot how the conversation came up, but when it did, it was like real, you can notice it was a change of mood. But like seeing that happen is like, that's why I'm pushing like you had your moment with watching that case. My moment is like I was doing the work already, but like now it's like not about me at all. I can give a damn. It's more about like I'm willing to go against the grain. And I remember going to conferences now. Well, not conferences. Going to speak at schools to teachers because I used to speak to students. Right, I did that. I still do that. I love doing that. But now I see the purpose in doing the teachers, right? The training for the teachers, right? And then being able to look at these administrators and these teachers that have been in the game for 20 plus years. Like I literally had a lady that could be my mom's, right? And she's listening to someone half her age that could be her son, right? And then me having to break it down in a way that will be like tangible for her or like something that would make sense for her to just get up and use, right? So like that whole challenge, but like having to like see that in the purpose behind it and see like the things that we like you said earlier, we go to what's easier, right? Because we got our own shit, right? We're dealing with, we want to get home, we got families, blah blah blah. We're trying to do things, so we tend to go to the easier thing, but like not noticing. And I mentioned this talking to my wife, like if you do the work, essentially your job gets easier, right? You become whole, you start practicing it at school, and then you start doing it outside of school. You start doing it with your life where it becomes second nature, and then it becomes easy to have these conversations with these kids, and you don't stress out with a certain behavior, and you don't take things personal anymore. It's just like, oh, that's a identifier that there's something wrong with. Not with me. He may have cursed me out. He may have said this and that, but this kid needs tending to, right? And I think that type of switch in mindset will change the game across the board. It's like, okay, what do you need? You need to step out for a second. You need to go get some water, right? To bring them back in and at least get that effort. But, and then once again, like what you said, the numbers matter. Like teachers get fired in these core classes, teachers get fired if you don't have certain numbers, if you don't have certain test scores, grades at a certain number, certain passing rates. So it becomes what is easier. Let me send that kid to DeAndre. Let me get that kid out of my class so my numbers go up. I keep my job and I don't lose my house or whatever it is. So it's like all around, like the system is like, and it's crazy that we have to find something like a purpose much greater to like be like, F that, I'm willing to like lose my job.
Well,
right?
I think that's what's so beautiful about restorative justice, right? As the answer for all of this is because, like, take the court system, right? Like, even if you've got really good intentioned people and they're like, they're tensed up and freaking out, like, well, what do we do with this person? What do we do with this person? Throw them in the cage.
Yeah.
That's been the answer. But like what you're saying is when you embed that, when you flip that switch, the system can then just enact that and essentially get easier and say, hey, we actually can just sit down and have that conversation and heal and make wholeness, and we don't have to throw people in cages.
Yeah. And we said this last episode, the microwave effect. We complain about students or kids, these kids, this generation, right? Everybody wants everything fast, every instant, like instantly microwave success. But like we need to look at the adults. We do too. Like everybody, like you just said, like let's get the microwave effect, just throw him in a cage, right?
Yeah.
He say something crazy, throw him in a cage, and it's just like, oh, this lesson is going to shit. Just let's get rid of this kid, right? He's missing my whole lesson.
No, it's crazy. It's like I'm looking at who we're thinking about, like teachers. Like you get more warnings as a teacher than you've given this kid. Right? I mean, teachers don't get saying, all right, well, you, after your first year, low numbers are going to send you to the worst school where all these other teachers are worse. And hopefully for 2 years you come out and right. Yeah. No, it's like you get an improvement plan, you get a mentor, you get all this stuff when you're doing all of that. But why my kid after first grade gets sent to me? Yeah. 1 year. 1 year after first grade, I get this kid.
The powerful to a different standard. And guess what that's called? Privilege.
Yeah. And I would just love to be able to like get teachers that reality check. Like, look how quick you're giving up on this kid, but you expect a principal or a school district not to give up on you.
Give you.
And you're an adult.
Dude,
you know better. You know what I mean?
I just had this meeting, right? And as I was speaking, the principal had the meeting, the PD with the teachers about like cell phones, right? And they were saying like the kids are taking over with the cell phones, this and that. Meanwhile, when I do engagements, like I said, I go for the whole day. So like I don't like just going and speaking and then not seeing what the culture's like, get a feel. So I went to classes. I was in classes. I was engaging with kids. I did a little speaking in classes and like that was a part of activities in classes. So I was like I was a part of the culture for the day, right? And then I spoke to the teachers at the end of the day. And the class that I was in, teacher's a boss. Like she's teaching, I think it was philosophy. Yo, I swear, like it was like, and the kids are, this is the thing, the kids were allowed to be them. She didn't change how they interacted. She just kept the conversation going and redirecting, right? The conversation, but didn't allow them to express themselves the way they express, right? Within the confines of the classroom, right? But the cell phone thing, right? Every class, she was like, we're talking about the water situation in Flint, Michigan, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all right, everybody take out your phones, look up the statistics and this and that. Boom, they pulled it out. Boom. She said, put it away, and then started a debate. I was in every single class. Some classes were more rowdier than others, but she allowed each class to have their own identity, right? Now, I felt that I had to get some years. Like I was a product of it, like getting straight out of college. I needed to move out my house and I went and got a teaching job. And then I had to learn like that doesn't happen out of college, right? That takes years. But like the work that goes into it, like putting in the work, like I'm sure she built those relationships. She allowed the kids to be themselves. And I felt this when I was at Kip Houston High School. Like when we did circles, teachers will feel a certain way because it would look different to them. But I'm like, that's bull. Like, let them be them. And I let kids like, the kids in my class were predominantly African, right? First generation, second generation African kids in America, right? And their experience is totally different. Like I had a bunch of kids that from Nigerian households that is very strict. There's no communication. There's no restorative anything, right? So like allowing them to get time to in a space that looks totally different than them going. And these are good students. These are kids that are outspoken and they have all this personality, but they're getting straight A's in the class, right? Because they have that discipline at home, right? But it looks different to do restorative. It looks crazy. So like building that and giving time to see, like I had to sit back and be like, my way don't work. Like my privilege, way doesn't work. Like I need to understand that I need to do something totally. Like the class was legit majority of those students, right? First generation, second generation African students. And I was just like, yo, like, and the way we build into the stuff that they got to talk about and express, and I learned about their households, I learned about like the things they deal with on a daily basis and all of this in a predominantly Latino community, which is crazy, you know what I mean? And like seeing that, I was like, whoa, right? So getting to that point and doing this speaking engagement to the teachers, like they're complaining about cell phones and the kids having control, right? So what we're gonna do, we're gonna take cell phones at the beginning of the day. I was like, what are we doing, right? What is that gonna help, right? Because at the end of the day, like the world is changing. Like there's so many things like, and I'm sure you feel like this with the criminal justice system. So many practices that are so outdated. Like, what are we doing? Why can't they use cell phones?
He said it's fear based.
Yeah,
Fear-based.
exactly.
Yeah, he's scared of what happens when I give them freedom to use a phone.
Like,
Then there's going to this, and then they're going to this, instead of saying, well, why can't I be confident in myself that I can control that?
Exactly.
Right? And that's the same thing, like kids, right? Like what I deal with, they've been trying to shut them down for the longest, right? This hyper kid, this angry kid, shut the behavior down, shut it down. Why don't you steer it?
Exactly.
You're not going to shut down a lot of these, the makeup of what makes them who they are. You're not going to shut it down. Wherever they got it from, like some of these rages that you see come from those parents, come from their parents, or come from somewhere, within the family as well, or some from the environment that they came from. Mm-hmm. And you have to understand that. And it's not going to go away. But what you can do is you can help them focus it on something else and start using those same skills that they use to get in trouble to do something more positive so they can start feeling good about themselves.
It takes time, man. It takes time. The work that we do this ain't gonna happen in 3 years and 2, 3 years, 4 years. It's gonna take more than that. And I think for me, my mission is to get as big as possible so that people will in those higher positions will listen.
Listen.
Because
There you go.
honestly, that's what I need to get to. Because I'm not anything against the schools that I'm working with or anything like that. It's just that they're so conditioned for years, right? In the systems that's been working, that made them successful, that kept money in their pocket, that kept the school running, right? And trying to break that is crazy. Like you said, you're gonna be rocking a lot of ships. You're gonna be stirring the pot, and people gonna get upset. It's gonna look different, but I'm willing to put it out there and put my neck out there because it's bigger than me now. But it's just like, you know what I mean? Like seeing that is crazy because it's like you said, flip it. Like kids, you're stopping kids from videoing on Snapchat or going on these sites, right?
TikTok.
To TikTok and everything. I'm on TikTok too, and I'm just like, that was crazy.
Man, my kids told me about it. I didn't even know about it.
Yeah.
I learned about it from a 5th grader right
It's
now.
a bunch of it's more videos and like music and silly stuff, and you know what I mean. So I can see the fear, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, if you're doing the right thing, you have nothing to fear, right? Get me on tape. What you gonna get? Me being professional, because that's all you gonna get, right? But the fear of what? And I think a lot of people haven't even thought about that. They're just saying that it's just it shouldn't be. And they're like, but I do my job well. What am I to fear? If they get me on camera and it goes viral, people will know more about my school.
You
Right?
know, it's funny.
You know
I
what I
had
mean? That's what I'm looking at.
I had a student. It was a 5th grader, and it's funny. I just talked to a teacher at the middle school that he's at, and she's saying he's ready to exit the program.
Yeah.
So I mean, he was feeling good about that. But I just remember when he was within our school, and it's a prime example of what happens when I try to get a kid back in regular classes. Like, because for me, I can get you in, okay, 30 minutes at a time. Oh, okay, he did good. Or I do an hour next week. Okay, he did an hour, half a day. Okay, after a month, if he's doing a full day, then he's going back to his regular classes. But you have to find a teacher who's willing to even allow him to do that, right? So, prime example. Go to say, man, this kid, he's pretty cool, man. He's good. He's mild tempered. I believe he's able to at least sit in the class for a few. Comes back after, and keep in mind, general education teachers don't really look into the background of a student.
Okay.
So the moment I talk to this teacher about getting this kid in class, all of a sudden they go and read their background. Oh man, it shows that he has a personality disorder. I don't know if this is going to work. Have you met the kid? Not even seen the kid before. But you first went into, the first thing you did was go into his file to see something you can argue to keep him out.
It makes me think.
Prosecutors.
Yeah, it makes me think of Tupac. For my younger viewers, Tupac Shakur was a rapper that was very popular in the 90s. But Tupac, when he was at the court, and I remember he stood up, and it was a big moment. Back then, there was no social media, but it went viral, basically, all over the news sites, where he stood up to the judges like, yo, like, just give me my sentencing. You haven't looked at me not one time. You haven't even, like, it doesn't even seem fair, the stuff that's going on. Just give me my sentence. I don't even want to stand. You're wasting time right now because you're not even willing to give me a shot. And I feel like that has not changed. And that was like 1993.
I think the only thing and they're not even changed, like you said, it hasn't changed, but the only thing different is we see it that is happening in other parts of life that we didn't even think about it. You know what I mean? Like not giving you a chance in the courtroom is the same as in the classroom now that we sit here and discuss it. Same as a person in jail, you trying to get out of jail, or a person already out of jail and trying to get a job, won't even look.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it was just that same concept of once you get hit with a stigma, whether it's a minority, whether it's a criminal background, whether it's a social economic status, what diagnosis, mental disorder, whatever. Once you get slapped with that fear of whatever it is gets kicked in. Yeah. Oh, I don't want a kid who's economically disadvantaged around me. You know, oh, what if he might take something? Right? I don't want to deal with this behavior kid. He might influence all my other kids. I don't want to do, right? So it's always a fear associated with whatever is related to discrimination at that time.
Well, and for those folks that are a part of the system, right? I'm a part of the system. You're a part of the system. We're all part of the system. And so everybody, when they walk in, adults or even the kids, right? I love the Restorative Justice Court in Chicago use the phrase, everybody's just a justice system participant. You know, we're all on the same field, same playing level. But But as we go into the system as our day-to-day lives, right, it's like every interaction with someone else, we have two choices, and it's as simple as that. You either decide fear and oppression, or you decide love and freedom. And if you continue to choose, like Tupac's judge, if you continue to choose fear and oppression and you're unwilling to engage with other human beings, right, your heart is then going to be oppressed. And the only way, if you choose love and freedom for that other person, that's the only way you're ever going to feel love and freedom for your own heart and release that. Release that.
And I think the important part, we get caught up in our own communities, like looking at the outsiders. Like they do that. But we need to look at our own selves and our own communities. We're doing it to ourselves as well. Right? We do it to ourselves where we're not opening ourselves up to have these conversations, protecting ourselves. And everybody's situation is different, but at the end of the day, we need to have those conversations. The mission should be is like, let's cut the bullshit. Let's just talk. Let's real talk. Let's just have this conversation right here.
Well, it's the craziest thing to me too, and that's again, you know, why we connected, because of the whole restorative justice is because what the end game of restorative justice is exactly what that fear and oppression like desires, is this like safety in communities. But it's like if you give true love and freedom as a society, you know each other, you know your neighbors, you know your classrooms, and guess what? You'll be able to make your community safe, and that is the end goal. So it's like the only way we're ever going to get to that peace that we all desire is to do exactly the opposite of what most people tend to do.
And it's just like a fear, like the fear of like feeling like you don't understand or you haven't been through that or whatever. It's just like most people just want you to be you. Right? Just be you and enter the door. Don't try to change your dialect. Don't try to change your swag because you're in a room. Like, and that's why I respect you, like, because you look like the type that you just come into space. Like I came in here a little later than you did. You were here before I was, right? And you're interacting with Dre, and it just looked like organic, like you just chilling, right? And it was just like you weren't trying to be anything different than who you are. And that's where I think that's the type of work you want to get to, right? And it's just like, that's where I'm preaching, like restorative practice isn't within the confines of 8 hours of the day at school or at work. It's something, it's a lifestyle, right? And at the end of the day, it makes your life better and easier. The fact that, like, I remember being a teacher, I'm talking from experience, being a teacher, starting out and just so like going to what's easy, like disciplining these kids because it was easier to do. I needed to get home. I had a baby on the way, or the baby was here, and that was a stressful time, so I didn't want to add more to my plate, and just going with what's easier. But understanding that like it got to a point where it became too much. I was taking what I was doing at home, at school, home, and like that oppression or like that neglect was like killing me. Right? And at the end of the day, like if you take the long route, right, get to do the work the right way with these kids, with these people that you're working with in these communities, right? Essentially, it starts transcending throughout your life, and it becomes like second nature, where you having these conversations from work to the grocery store with a random person, to your relative that you're meeting after work, on the weekends, you just meeting random people and just having these conversations. It becomes second nature. Right, so when you get back to work, it's like, this is what I do all day. Like this isn't nothing, right? And I think that's what we wanted to get to, and that's what we should be trying to get to.
Every time you choose love and freedom, it makes it easier to choose love and freedom the next time.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. But it's crazy.
Well, in my case, love and support.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's so interesting how many people I come across, teachers or people who are associated with education, who really find it difficult to love a child. You know, especially the problematic ones, right? It's like whenever you suggest a solution that does that's based on love or support, it's like, you know, that fear kicks in. Like, why would that? No, that kid didn't deserve that, you know. And so, I wish that people would take that concept into mind when they're dealing with that problematic child. Like, yes, it's easier to respond, you know, with your emotions and you know, go straight to punishment, right? Like, not even discipline. We're talking straight punishment. And you know, like I said, because it's easier to to do something real quick and express yourself through the choice you make.
Throw them in a cage.
Right. And so it's quite funny, like when you mention, most people just want you to be who you are. Well, not my kids. Right? They've been told to change every day. They've been told that they're not good every day. And it sucks because I know when they get older, they're going to told, oh, well, this is your strength. Just do that. Why can't they be told that early on? Right? I mean, because that's what eventually happens, right? Like, even if they don't make it in general education, they push them over to a trade or just pretty much do something you can do.
That's true.
Right? But if we know that that's what's going to happen, why haven't we designed a program more towards that at a younger age versus a program that's designed to just ship them out of there?
Yeah. It's crazy.
Well, and I got to thank y'all for this conversation because I've never explored the depths of the similarities of applying restorative justice in these two arenas. I mean, I've always thought of, America's restorative justice is going into schools and, okay, well, I got to drag it back into, there's two different systems that restorative justice should be applied to. But this is helping me see, like, no, this is the same. It's just the same thing.
That's why I think it was a great decision to bring you on and have this conversation. I know it's being recorded, but like we're learning in the moment. Like I'm learning from the conversation, the stories you got, and Dre's bringing up stuff, and we're learning. And I'm actually, a lot of stuff that I was saying was off of what you guys were saying. Like, I think this is the beautiful thing of just having these conversations, right? And a lot of what we're talking about is this right here, and creating this type of space for like educators and just like, it's just like, let's cut the bullshit. We all have biases. What are yours? Right? Let's just cut to the chase. Like you have this type of privilege. I have that type of privilege. I am aware of it, and I think that will change the conversation. I think when you were talking, it just hit me. I was just like, everybody's trying so hard to be a good person that they end up not being a good person because they're trying to do the right thing in school terms or in the justice system terms. What is the right thing? Like, what is the right thing? Systems that work years, centuries ago, right? For factory workers and all that, and it's still being in these schools. Like, we haven't really truly adjusted. And if we look at that, it'll be easier to have the conversation. It's not personal. We want to be better. Let's just have this conversation.
This reminds me of the conversation we had about, I think it was maybe the first 2 episodes, and we talked about fatherhood. And we were talking about how sometimes we had made mistakes trying not to be like
our fathers.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's what happens when people are trying to be perfect. They're simply trying to avoid the wrong. Yeah. But because you're thinking about avoiding the wrong is still on your mind, and eventually your brain is going to go towards the wrong.
Yep.
Right. And what you should be doing, right, is not thinking about the mistake you shouldn't make, but simply thinking about the right thing you should do. And just and then just keep those type of thoughts in your head versus the fear of making that mistake or the opposite of what you're not supposed to do. You know what I mean?
But it's not even that. Well, I agree with that. I mean, like, just being present, like, in your thoughts. Like, J. Cole said this in an interview recently, and I just love the way his mind is at right now, where he's talking about, like, I don't want to be a slave to my thoughts. And that's why he's doing meditation. It's just like, we are slaves to our thoughts, like, all day. And especially as a business owner now, it's just like, there's so much stuff in my head. Like, I literally have to tell myself, stop. You know what I mean? And J. Cole said it, like, sometimes he just sitting in the room, he's just like, yo, let me just listen to the fan. And just like, give me 5 minutes of just doing that and just be present in the moment. I think if we look at that in the profession of teaching, education, or in the law enforcement field, like, or in law, to just take a second and be present, so we can offer up what's necessary. We can identify, like, yeah, our mind is gonna wander off, but we have to reshift that to, like, be like, okay, I'm here, right? And that's normal. Like, we have thoughts all in our heads every 2 seconds, and it's all about being present and having those conversations to be able to identify it. And I said this to a group of kids. It's like, we talk about, don't talk about your stuff because people are gonna know your stuff, and you don't want people to know your weakness and all that. That's bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
That's complete bullshit. It's like you should talk about it more so you know it more. And it don't matter who knows it. Because if you talk about it more, you're gonna know it better than anybody else, and it's gonna be water off your back.
I'm gonna give a good plug to old Brian Stevenson. I got to watch a screening of Just Mercy. It's coming out in Christmas.
With Michael B. Jordan
Oh yeah,
and Jamie Foxx.
yeah. So I got to see it
about
earlier, early at Texas Southern University, and my favorite line. So I'm giving away a piece of it, but at the end, the girl that had helped him start the organization looked at him and just said, lawyers always told me that you shouldn't get too close to your clients because you'll get too emotionally invested. And that kind of equates to what you're saying is like lawyers always operate in this sense that don't take the time to pause and look at your client, right? And then what she says in the movie is, you've taught me that that's complete bullshit. You look at your clients like their family, and you love them, and you know their family, and you care what happens to them. And that's because Brian Stevenson like took the time to stop and say, who is this person?
How does this make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is pretty deep, because when we were talking with Tyrone about that, and asked him about that, I can see that being difficult for someone who's made a living being a shark.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's like you've been conditioned to focus so much on what you do, and that's what made you good at what you are. So to tell that particular person to stop is almost like telling him to go against what made him him. I can see if they were unsuccessful at it, right? But you still have your fair share of people that are very, very successful when they are thinking like that. And or like say, for example, the prosecutor. He should definitely look at the defendant. You should definitely not want to get to know that guy, because your job is to put him away. Your job, your purpose is to, so.
Well, yeah, their job should be to seek justice.
Well, of course.
But you're right.
Of course, right. The culture, right?
To put him away.
Yeah. And so for that person, they're not trying to, let's see what kind of guy he is. Like, nah.
Right.
No. All I know is he did this. I got to make sure that these people see that this is what he did, so they can, put him away.
It's crazy, man. I think this is what needs to be at. I think this is the best episode we had so far. To be honest, Drew, you came in and killed it. You put flames on this right here, man. Nah, you killed it. I think your perspective is key, and I think you noticing that it all aligns, because we've been saying it, but like having you here and actually being able to articulate that and say that from your field to all the way to elementary and to high school, like it all connects. It's crazy. Like, we need to do the work. I think bringing awareness is the first step. You know what I mean? I know your process is gonna be years down the line, right? And mine is too. And I just, hopefully we inspire you guys to like wanna whatever it is y'all wanna impact, or whatever it is, takes time to break old habits that work. And I think, like what you're saying, I think the beautiful thing now is that it's documented differently. Like, even these big entertainers, like all that rah rah at the beginning where they're getting this money, they're doing all these shows, rappers are like killing it. It looks more like that's a show, because you have other rappers that went through that, like the J. Cole stage, then the Jay-Z stage, right? Where it's like you see the growth, the trend. Like, yeah, I was at that time, but I had to grow out of it. This is how I did it, right? It's out there. And I think that if we start using that to our advantage, like people that are in those worlds, right, are saying like, no, we need to reflect. Jay-Z had a whole album about, and whatever you may feel about Jay-Z was a hot thing back in his 20s, and his 30s, right? When he was the main person. Whoever's hot right now, he was hotter than them, right? And then he grew out of that, and he had a whole album about reflection, and like, I effed up. Like, I messed up my marriage. I almost lost all my kids, and I almost lost all my money. This is how I learned how to get out of it, right? and just using that to our advantage, because that's key. It's out there. Like it's evident that if we don't reflect and we just oppress, right, it's not gonna get you to a good place. You're gonna end up like a lot of these documentaries with these entertainers losing their shit, right, and not being happy. And that's not what we're trying to get to. We're trying to be more healthy. So, episode 11. I think this is a great one. Thank you, Drew, for coming down and blessing us with your presence and your knowledge and your background. Dre, thank you for always opening up and giving us your perspective. Episode 11. This is one for the books. We'll be back next time with episode 12. I'll see y'all later.